America's allies are quietly preparing for a world where they can't count on Washington. And what happens next could reshape global politics forever. When President Donald Trump clasped hands with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at his Scottish golf resort in July 2025, announcing yet another trade agreement, the symbolism was unmistakable. But here's what most observers missed. While Trump was making deals on his own terms, America's traditional partners were already having very different conversations behind closed doors. Ben Bland, who leads the Asia-Pacific program at London's prestigious Chatham House think tank and has authored multiple works on Asian political dynamics, reveals a fascinating paradox that's been brewing for months. Even before Trump's return to power, diplomatic insiders and security experts across both Europe and Asia were grappling with a troubling contradiction that keeps many of them awake at night. On one side, these nations live in genuine fear of watching the international framework that has guaranteed their prosperity and security for decades simply crumble away. On the other side, and this is where it gets controversial, they've been remarkably reluctant to make the tough investments and structural overhauls necessary to survive in an increasingly unpredictable global landscape. But something fundamental appears to be shifting, and it's happening faster than most people realize. Recent months have witnessed an unprecedented surge in coordination and collaboration among America's key allies, spanning both Europe and the Indo-Pacific region. These partnerships are expanding across virtually every domain that matters. International trade relationships, defense capabilities, alliance management strategies, and perhaps most significantly, their collective approach to managing China's growing influence. Consider this remarkable alignment. The United Kingdom, France, and Germany, undoubtedly Washington's most crucial European partners, share striking similarities with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea, who serve as the fundamental pillars supporting America's Indo-Pacific alliance network. All of these nations function as democratic middle powers, with deep commitments to maintaining open trade policies and encouraging international investment flows. The most telling moment came when foreign ministers from these 7 nations, joined by Poland, another critical player in European security architecture, gathered for an unprecedented meeting on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. What made this gathering truly extraordinary wasn't just the new diplomatic format they created, but the fact that they deliberately met without any American presence, despite being on American soil. Their joint acknowledgement that peace, security, and resilience in the Indo-Pacific and Europe are becoming more intertwined represented more than diplomatic pleasantries. They committed to deeper cooperation across maritime security challenges, cybersecurity threats, economic security concerns, climate change responses, and the broader spectrum of geopolitical uncertainties that keep their governments on edge. British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper's participation in both the Security Council meeting and this separate allied gathering on September 23rd at UN headquarters perfectly illustrated this new diplomatic reality. Allies are creating their own forums for coordination, independent of traditional American-led structures. And this is the part most people miss about what's really driving these changes. On the economic front, these countries are actively developing strategies to protect themselves from Beijing's increasingly aggressive weaponization of its manufacturing dominance and technological superiority. Simultaneously, they're building defenses against mounting protectionist pressures emanating from the United States. Pressures that actually began building well before Trump's return to the White House.
This raises a provocative question.
Are America's closest allies essentially preparing to go it alone? The new alliance architecture. Can middle powers fill the superpower gap? Whether economic isolation makes strategic sense for a superpower like America remains hotly debated, but one thing is crystal clear. America's allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific will face severe consequences in a world where trade and investment barriers continue multiplying. Large, technologically advanced, economically open nations such as the UK, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea, and Australia will need to dramatically intensify their collaborative efforts in the coming years to preserve the free movement of goods, services, and capital investments. One particularly promising pathway involves expanded cooperation around the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, a regional trade framework that originally enjoyed Washington's backing until President Trump's withdrawal in 2017. Currently, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and the UK hold CPTPP membership, while South Korea actively considers joining, and the European Union explores opportunities to deepen trade connections with CPTPP member nations. But here's where it gets controversial. Are these nations essentially building a parallel economic system designed to function without American leadership? Technology represents another domain where these countries could forge a more powerful coalition. Both China and the United States are deploying increasingly aggressive strategies as they compete for dominance in critical technologies, ranging from artificial intelligence and semiconductor manufacturing to electric vehicle battery systems. None of Washington's major allies possess the financial resources or corporate infrastructure to compete independently in these high-stakes technological races. However, by pooling their knowledge bases and resource capabilities, they could potentially ensure they don't get left behind in the global innovation race. More importantly, they can coordinate strategies to avoid isolation in a world where technological systems and standards are increasingly splitting along geopolitical lines. Regarding defense and intelligence cooperation, there's clearly no immediate substitute for the foundational role that Washington has traditionally played. Nevertheless, European and Indo-Pacific allies are already expanding direct connections with each other, rather than depending exclusively on the United States for leadership, coordination, and defense procurement decisions. Consider this striking example. Instead of purchasing fighter aircraft from American manufacturers, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom are collaborating to develop their own next-generation combat aircraft through the Global Combat Air Program. This initiative could mark the beginning of a much broader effort to interweave defense and security capabilities between allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, potentially creating an alternative to American-dominated defense systems. The leadership challenge, navigating without a North Star. This strategic shift isn't about severing relationships with Washington. Quite the opposite, actually. It represents a calculated response to evolving dynamics in American domestic politics, ensuring that U.S. allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific can make more substantial and independent contributions to global stability. However, coordinating effectively between middle powers across Europe and Asia, without the organizational weight and resources of American leadership, presents enormous challenges that many experts believe may prove insurmountable. Within the European Union itself, France and Germany continue experiencing significant friction, with their joint fighter jet initiative, the Future Combat Air System, facing serious uncertainty due to ongoing political disputes and commercial competition between their defense industries. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom is gradually rebuilding relationships with European neighbors following Brexit, but its position outside the EU creates substantial obstacles for defense and industrial cooperation efforts. In the Indo-Pacific region, deep-rooted historical tensions between Japan and South Korea have repeatedly limited their capacity to cooperate effectively with the United States and other regional allies. Despite shared security concerns about China's growing assertiveness, overcoming these entrenched tensions will require visionary leadership, capable of looking beyond historical grievances and developing creative, flexible, and cost-effective solutions that serve everyone's interests. The ultimate question that could define the next decade if America's allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific fail to achieve greater cooperation among themselves, they will individually lack the resources, scale, and influence necessary to thrive during these increasingly uncertain times. But here's the controversial part that nobody wants to discuss openly. Are we witnessing the beginning of a post-American alliance system, or simply a temporary adjustment while Washington sorts out its domestic priorities? What do you think? Are America's allies right to hedge their bets and build independent capabilities? Or does this represent a dangerous fracturing of the Western alliance system that has maintained global stability for decades? Should middle powers be preparing for a world where they can't rely on American leadership? Or are they overreacting to temporary political changes in Washington? Share your thoughts. This debate could shape the future of international relations for generations to come.